to say hello, folks, as you're joining. Um, Maybe we'll do the age-old just Canadian content question while we're waiting for folks to trickle in. Folks can just talk about the weather that they're having. I know our chat isn't open for our attendees, but for panelists, I can start. I'm joining from BC. I'm on the island in Victoria, kind of like notorious BC weather today, kind of overcast and cloudy. I think probably around 7 or 8 degrees. It's kind of a normal MO, I'd say, for this time of year. Pina, I'll pass to you. What's the weather like in your part of the country?
Hi everyone. This is Pina. The weather here is actually raining. It's raining. It's supposed to be warm. The temperature was supposed to hit something like 17 degrees, but I don't think it's gotten that hot, that warm at all. So I'd say probably around 10 right now, but it's raining and cloud.
Spring showers. Scott, what about
Mhm.
yourself?
Where I am in Calgary. Thanks to everyone who's joining, by the way. Numbers are creeping up there. That's awesome. It's kind of a spring plus 10 Chinooki kind of day with some wind, which for those who don't reside here is a little bit early. So spring is always a nice blessing. Sheldon, how is northern Alberta looking today?
Probably slightly colder, but surprisingly, very melty, very melty. A lot of ice, a lot of puddles, very melty.
Nice.
Kind of similar, kind of different across the country. Sounds again like very, very spring-like weather. Um, we'll maybe get into things. I think we have a jam-packed hour today, so just want to say welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. Um, we have the chat turned off just to ensure an accessible experience for those using screen readers, but please feel free to let us know if you need anything using the Zoom Q&A function. My name's Kim Donaldson. I'm the General Manager of Code for Canada's Inclusive User Research Service. The Code for Canada team is based all around the country. As I mentioned, I'm in Victoria, BC, the unceded territory of the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich First Nations, who are the traditional stewards of the land that Victoria is located. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a white woman with shoulder-length, reddish, blondish, curly hair. Today I'm wearing glasses and I was trying to look semi-professional, so I'm wearing a t-shirt and a beige blazer. Some quick housekeeping things before we get started. As I mentioned up top, if you need assistance, you can use the Zoom Q&A function. Our marketing and communications coordinator, Valerie, is around to assist you. If you have any questions for panelists, they're absolutely welcome. We have two options for you. The first one is we have an anonymous Slido linked in the chat. Alternately, you can use the Zoom Q&A function, which also has the option to be anonymous. We have here with us today James Markin and Shelby Graham, who will be taking turns providing ASL interpretation. We also have Dalton Harris providing the live transcription, which you can see by selecting Show Captions at the bottom of your screen. I know that this is sometimes located in the More button if you're viewing on a narrower screen. A recording and transcript of the event will be emailed to you tomorrow. And I can confirm we are recording. I heard it at the beginning. And finally, the following keyboard shortcuts can be used to navigate the webinar. F6 to navigate among Zoom pop-up windows, including the Q&A panel. Alt-H to display or hide the chat panel. Again, will only be used by Code for Canada to share information, such as that Slido link. Alt-U to display or hide the participant panel, and Control-Alt-Shift to focus on Zoom's meeting controls. So with that out of the way, I'm excited to get started. If you're less familiar with us, Code for Canada is a national nonprofit that works with governments and nonprofit organizations to create modern, inclusive, and accessible digital services. Our Inclusive User Research Service tests public digital services in collaboration with underrepresented groups, including people with disabilities, to ensure their needs are met. Towards the end of last year, we worked with the government of Alberta on the sign-up process for the Alberta.ca account portal. We tested the process with 10 people with disabilities to uncover accessibility barriers that a traditional accessibility audit focused more on compliance might not catch. So today we'll be digging into some of the learnings from that project, along with how usability testing can be used to create more accessible services in the public sector. We're very lucky today and grateful to have three leaders in this field paneling with us. I'm going to do a quick introduction for all three of them. I'm not going to provide a visual description just in the interest of time this afternoon. So firstly, we have Pina. She's based in Toronto, is an accessibility expert and entrepreneur, speaker, and founder of the Aequum Global Access, Inc. Scott Herron is an accessibility consultant and advocate who is also one of our 10 participants for this Alberta.ca project. He's joining from Alberta. And also joining from Alberta, Sheldon Bauld is the Director of User Experience for the Government of Alberta, who we worked with on the Alberta.ca project. So today, I'll begin with a few questions for our panelists, and then we'll get into audience questions from the Slido and or the Zoom Q&A. And just a quick note on questions, don't be shy. I know we have people joining from the accessibility and disability communities today, as well as those who are maybe less familiar with digital accessibility. So please feel free to ask your questions. So Pina, we're going to start with you. You've worked extensively with different levels of government on a range of digital accessibility projects, and you also have experience across many different sectors. From your perspective, what digital accessibility challenges are unique to the public sector, and can public-private partnerships help address them?
Well, thank you very much, Kim, and thank you for having me. I'm going to go right to the question and skip the description of myself just so that we can save some time. But I think what's really important here when we talk about what is unique to the government, not much. Much of what the government is facing is very common and it's found in many other organizations. But if we look at the government specifically, let's take the federal government, for instance, where they hire about 360,000 employees. Some of their concerns or some of their challenges are related to the fact that they have thousands and thousands of software and applications that they use daily just for internal purposes. Can you imagine what it is for external purposes? And I think part of that is that these software, these applications are very, very tightly integrated. Some of them are legacy systems that are written in COBOL languages and language that is even not even supported anymore, or that where the skills are very difficult to find nowadays. So there's a lot to be looking at in regards to the complexity of the environment when we think about digital. The other thing too is that there's in the digital world, and having worked with many companies both in the private and public sector, nothing is static. Because the minute you push that button, it changes, right? You're done. You're done with. And so it's a continuous effort. And so if accessibility is not integrated in the processes, if you don't have the guardrails in place to make sure that things are accessible before you click that push button or you release that publication, then you're in trouble. Right? Because things go out there in vast number very, very, very quickly. So those guardrails are absolutely imperative. And I think the other part too, I think the other thing is also that a lot of public sector organizations will tell me, well, we don't have time. We don't have time to test. We don't have time to find people with disabilities and get them engaged in the process. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that you'll have, because if you don't do that early, you're going to have to remediate and you're going to have to do it later. And we know by many studies that remediating is so much more expensive than actually taking care of the requirements up front. And that's really no different than any project. You do it for other projects. You make sure that your requirements are tight before you start kicking a project, avoiding project scopes. This is the same when it comes to accessibility. The better your accessibility requirements are at the front end of your process, the better it's going to get to deliver a product that is superior to any other ones that you may want to deliver. So I think all in all, they're not unique. They're not unique in their world. It's very similar to many, many other organizations. What is, the biggest challenge here is often size, complexity, and obviously trying to keep up with change, which in this case could also be the high turnover. And so, everything that's related to how do you make sure that, what you have is sustained when people move around? Is it just training? Is it operational procedures? What is it? And I think all of that comes into play.
Yeah, absolutely. You shared a lot there, Pina. One thing that I definitely resonated with was you mentioned kind of shifting accessibility earlier into your practices and processes, and I think kind of you mentioning training as well. I think all that's a part of it, and absolutely, we've seen kind of the results of when accessibility is made an initial consideration. Design and development are just so much easier, right? We save time, we save money, whether we're talking about a digital service or something else. We've seen the rewards of that.
Yeah, and I think also we're in a time right now where we're saying, buy Canadian, right? Buy
Yeah,
Canadian.
that's right.
I'm going to say to people, buy accessible, right? Make
Yeah.
sure that when you're buying products, you ask for accessibility right up front. Make sure your vendors provide you solutions that are accessible, because that will really help you in the long run.
Can I
Yeah,
just tag
great.
in on that quickly, guys?
Yeah,
And
please.
and if they're not fully accessible, find out what their accessibility plan is.
Exactly.
Do they have something in the next 6 months? Do they have a release coming? Would they be willing to partner with you to work on this accessibility plan if you could make some suggestions? That also is a great win-win for both organizations, right? That are your vendor and yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And that win-win is good for them because they get to market their products more to more clients. And it's win for us because as a sector, we get what we need.
Absolutely. Great tips for folks who have procurement in their portfolios for sure. Scott, we're gonna stick with you. You're also a longtime accessibility consultant and advocate, and we were lucky to have you help Code for Canada test the Alberta.ca sign-up process. Can you share some of the barriers that you encountered in evaluating the service?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And it's a great pleasure to be here with our esteemed panelists and everybody helping us to get this off the ground and support behind the scenes who you don't see on camera. So kudos to everyone for doing that. I'd just like to kind of reiterate, this is a safe space. So if you're feeling a little uncomfortable with a question you might want to pose on Slido or that kind of thing, trust us, it's not something that we would ever be offended by. So please feel free. And as you can see, we're pretty transparent with our answers. So thankfully, Kim and I have worked together before, so we had kind of a connection from a previous organization and was super happy to partner on this project. Basically, my role in this case, I wore a lot of hats, but in this case was strictly as a tester and kind of a suggestion provider to both designers, developers, and product owners after we took a review of the Alberta.ca experience, let's call it, that was provided for us. So some real challenges kind of come up right away where we start talking about user choice. They are trying to integrate multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, some folks might call it. And there was really only one user choice that I had as a screen reader user at that point. So that really makes a person feel very limited, that they've really taken your considerations to heart and that they've thought about how this experience is going to potentially work for you or quite likely not work for you if it's only one choice. And if that's not your ability to communicate and use that particular means, there was another choice provided for us to get the code, but it was actually using the good old snail mail feature. How is that practical for comparing yourself to a sighted user and, being able to use it within 5-10 minutes? Obviously, that's, something that talks about, legacy systems like Pina mentioned and that kind of thing. There were some other kind of coding issues that we encountered pretty quickly where things were not labeled well on the website. So it was very interesting to come across those. We were able, of course, to have the screen reader recordings and folks taking notes and kind of observing, and we would talk through potential solutions, how you could improve those kinds of things. But, that's current state, right? So we all have to start somewhere, whether it's the full accessibility journey per se, or looking at one particular, user flow or user experience. Always like to impart to people that, good design equates to good inclusive/accessible design, right? So if you can empower your teams to think about it from that point of view, make sure that you bring folks in like myself, either to work in your organization throughout the process, or like the Alberta government has done here, reached out and just made sure to connect with folks who have different perspectives that need to be voiced in the room, right? I know we're going to move fast here, so I want to put this out there now. I have 2 quick takeaways that I'd love all of you to try, just to kind of get a different sense of a user experience other than just clicking on your mouse and that kind of thing. So we have many different folks with disabilities who will be keyboard only users. So they will just use tab, shift tab, arrow through their experiences. So give that a try on something that you're thinking about building or are building and see how that resonates for you. And then the other alternative, which is even more kind of earth-shattering, go get a screen reader, go download the free JAWS for Windows or turn on something on your mobile device. Don't look at your screen and then try and navigate through the experience. Even though you know it as a sighted user potentially, you're going to find the experience is vastly different trying to use it with assistive technology. So those are a couple of key takeaways that I share with everyone. And obviously, that's going to be a very eye-opening experience for you. And, always happy to talk about those things anytime for sure. So Kim, back over to you.
No, that's great. I'm sure folks, as you say, it'll be a bit of an awakening for folks who maybe haven't tried those types of navigation in the past. Just before we move to Sheldon, I just wanted to something kind of came to mind as you were speaking. And I mean, you had mentioned a couple of barriers that you found, but kind of on the flip side of that, I'm curious for you, like, what does it feel like when an organization, whether it's private or public sector, is actually taking the steps to try to understand the experience of people with disabilities and kind of making movements to try to make their product or service more accessible?
Yeah, I think that's a great door opener, Kim. Like Pina, I've done a whole host of different quick in and out kind of gigs and talked about strategic points of view for the bigger picture kind of things. But even on the smaller vein, hey, I'm rethinking of doing my website. I want to know what it's like for you as a screen reader person, or I want to know what it's like for someone who might be, neurodiverse. And, we get talking about cognitive load and all those kinds of issues, like what are barriers for those folks with that kind of disability to using the website. So those discussions are always amazing to start the ball rolling. And then celebrate, like even when you build something as simple as like a sign up form for somebody and it works. And if there's an error made, you put their focus back into the area where the error is made and you tell them how to fix it. These are all amazing things that you need to share in your organizations. Yeah, they might seem small in the big picture, but it builds that momentum of, digital or, just being all around inclusive and being accessible in all forms. So, I mean, those are some small wins that we can all take away from this. And, you're going to hear more about this later, but Canada is quite far behind most of the rest of the world in digital accessibility. So there will be changes coming at some point, and we all need to get on board with that because the mandate will come that you have to adhere to the legislation for web content accessibility guidelines, and you can't just have it be passable. It actually has to work for people with disabilities. Otherwise, there'll be repercussions for the organizations and brands will be harmed, and all those kinds of things unfortunately have to take place. But if you do some research on that, you can find where the US and Europe and a lot of Asia are in this space already. They're much further down that path. And I know there's been a few questions about that post. So maybe I'll just leave it at there, but always makes you feel great inside when people want to actually talk about it and take action and be accountable for actually doing something as opposed to just talking about it and putting it on a shelf 6 months later.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think it's important to know for folks who are maybe haven't engaged in accessibility testing before that it's not just an opportunity for folks to give you negative opinions on your product or service, but you really want to engage in the conversation and want to contribute to those design and development decisions, right? So yeah, I appreciate that kind of extra context. Sheldon, switching over to you, you oversee a number of service delivery projects with the province of Alberta. Could you share what motivated Alberta's digital design and delivery division to leverage usability testing to better understand the accessibility and usability of the site sign-up process?
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to meet everybody also, and thanks for having me. For us, I mean, this stuff is a bit of a no-brainer. We're a pretty big design shop, and of course, we try everything we do to be human-centered. For our division, digital design and delivery, everything we try to do is human-centered. We're trying to inject user-centered design principles into every product experience. I think for us, the opportunity is, we really get to learn a lot. In UX circles, there's a phrase like "you are not your user," and it's because the way people interact with digital products, their experiences, the knowledge they bring to get to the table, how they think about things, and especially in the lens of persons with disabilities, like, there may be limitations or behaviors that we are just totally unaware of. We're really poor proxy users in a lot of ways. And so for us, we really want to make sure that our products are as accessible and as useful and usable to the broadest range of people we can. And so we were really excited about this work because we don't often get to do a lot of accessibility specific research. And so, for us, what it means as an organization is, yeah, we get to test this flow for a new product that we're doing, but we also get to learn a lot about a set of, a group of people that we don't have a lot of exposure to. I think, a typical production shop, we know a lot about WCAG and the guidelines to AA and like that mechanistic side of the equation. I think, designers are quite good now about trying to make sure some of those basics are checked off. And, at a production level, there's a QA layer that's, checking for those things. But I think what motivated us the most is that lived experience piece. And so I think when you get to really see and observe and hear the stories about how folks with different kinds of limitations are using different kinds of assistive technologies, the way they act, the way they think, the way they, navigate and use digital products is so different and in a lot of ways. And so I know for us as a team, we got to look at a lot of the information that came from the recordings and go like, well, I've never seen that tool before, or I've never seen someone use a screen reader in this way, or boy, is the experience when I use a screen reader so different than what an experienced screen reader user looks like. And so I think for us, it's a huge opportunity to learn, and we were quite lucky and quite fortunate on this one to get such a diverse kind of set of assistive technologies. At the government, we've got kind of internal working groups, but I think there's always that layer of familiarity with government and government services. And so getting that fresh perspective with, people we've not seen or heard from before is just so invaluable.
For
And I
sure.
think this is Pina, and I think it's it's also a little bit of a balancing act, right? Because you have the side of things where we're seeing new technology, new accessibility features built into all of these devices now that make it maybe a little bit easier for people with disabilities like myself, who's visually impaired. There's prediction, there's this, there's that. But at the same time, we also have to remember that not everybody has access to all of those devices. Not everybody has access to all of that bandwidth. And so remembering and designing for the marginalized will benefit everyone. But if you design for the more powerful users, if you design for the ones who use the technology, those who are technology savvy, you're still going to leave people behind. So I think it's really, really important, to your point, Sheldon, when it's observing people who are at different stages of their disability or use of technology to really get a good perspective on what that user experience is like.
And
I
let's just take it
I
to
couldn't agree
another.
more. Oh,
I
sorry,
just
Scott, go
No,
ahead.
it's all good, Sheldon. Oh, we talked about how we jump on each other, so it's all good. Um, and so much of Canada is rural too, friends, right? So this often will just come down to a connectivity issue.
Mhm.
You can't get cell service out in the boonies, not to mention the fact that people can't afford to keep up if they're marginalized in any capacity. So we need to make sure they have quality internet, which is something the country is still working on.
Yeah.
And then we need to keep in mind that over 60% of users still are desktop/laptop users, whether that's out of convenience or economic disparagence, or whether that's just the technology they know. That's more often the way people are still connecting. So that's when it kind of goes back to our human-centered design and user choice parameters. These are all things we need to make sure we keep forefront in every discussion we have with different folks, and make sure that we ask those difficult questions. Hey, you built a great app, but has this been tested? Is it going to work for people that don't have access to that new greatest things in sliced bread that you just put out?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to kind
Absolutely.
of second Pina's point there about just like the range of experience with their particular disability. And I think, what we hear a lot is like, well, I've checked it with a screen reader. It's like there's a big gap between me checking it with a screen reader and someone who actually uses it for their day-to-day work or has used it all their life. And certainly with people maybe newly diagnosed or more unfamiliar with the tools, there's yet again another difference. And I think it's a difference that you really have to see to understand, because I think the behaviors that people have learned and adapted, and the way that they've learned to kind of navigate, interact with these products is just different. And I think with all forms of user research, it's sort of like, unless you see it, you don't really understand it to the best that you could. And I think when it comes to us building the cases internally in our organizations, being able to observe and send people, and this project we had Edel, one of our designers, did an amazing job building support for this work, but also participating. And I think they're able to bring back so much with what they've seen, what they've heard. But even in the case of recordings, it's like, it's one thing to maybe see in a PowerPoint deck some snippets of what someone said, or a spreadsheet of like, here's the challenges that they ran into. But to be able to watch a video clip and to see a little bit of what their experience like is just worth so much more. And I think that observation layer with someone who is really familiar or really unfamiliar with the tooling is just helps build that case internally, and build that empathy that sort of us as designers are always trying to build.
And thank you,
Yeah,
Sheldon. Sorry, I was going to say thank you, Sheldon, for that, because like you mentioned, depending on where your own disability journey is or how it started, it will change the way you interact and experience life, right? So for someone like myself, I lost my sight later in life, I may never be that power user, but I will be an advanced user, right?
yeah,
Of screen reading.
But to be
Excuse me.
fair, Pina, like in some forums, you are still like a super elite user because you fashioned the experience to work for you, right? So your skill set, you've adapted and you've grown. So don't sell yourself short. I'm sure, actually, I know you, so I know you're a super elite user of the technology. And that's part of it, right? Is we all find ways to cope. And I don't know if cope is the best word, but to make the experience work for us so that we can be independent and not have to call on, in mine and Pina's case, sighted friends, but folks who have difficulties. Maybe they're using a head pointer, or maybe they're hearing impaired and something hasn't been put together well for them. Well, they may need support, like we have our wonderful interpreter, ASL interpreters here today. These are all key cogs that we need to think about depending on what medium we're designing in, and make sure that we include as many folk as we can.
Absolutely.
yeah. And I'm loving the conversation, and really cool to kind of witness the insights from different perspectives. One other thing that came to mind, Sheldon, as you were kind of talking about the experience of maybe someone who doesn't need to use a screen reader testing versus, someone who uses it day to day. Just kind of thinking about that difference between testing for compliance and testing for usability as well, where I feel like, I think that doing some testing in the design, in the development process, there's definitely a benefit there and is part of the process. But as you shared, kind of some of those aha moments and extra insights that you were able to get from actually witnessing folks follow the flow with the setup that they're used to using was a little bit different.
Yeah, and I would say too, just because something is compliant, it definitely never indicates that it is going to be a good experience. Like the lived experience is still, there's no guarantees there. And I think, especially with really complicated applications where maybe a lot of modals and lots of things are popping up and changing, until you really start to get a sense of the experience. Like you could have the code pass all the checks in the world,
Yeah.
but if all of the flags aren't there, like the screeners can really stumble still quite a bit. And even simple things like language, the way we've decided to write something or articulate something,
Yep.
sometimes it never reads back if it's even in the right order in the first place. But there's just so many
Mm.
sort of more experiential issues that pop up that the compliance checkers just simply don't catch.
And the compliance testers will not check for things that affect cognitive or
Yeah.
or or
No, they won't.
the how the footprint is being used, whether there's enough spacing, whether it's an overload for someone with a learning disability, for instance. These are all things that you only find out when you're actually doing manual testing with with live people and
Yep.
get their feedback, right? The tools are not sophisticated enough to mimic what people experience is with particular in those particular situations. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind, especially excuse me, especially when we're seeing a huge increase or significant increase in people who identify as neurodivergent, which means that they have more than one disability that they're dealing with at one time. And so this now presents a bit of even a more important reason why you want to include people with disabilities in your test, right? I just wanted to kind of get to the point where one of the biggest mistakes that happens in testing is that people often focus on screen readers only, right? And we need to be cautious of that. Screen readers is definitely one way of testing. Certainly addresses the needs of one certain population, but there is more to testing than just the use of screen readers. And so, that seems to be the default for a lot of people, but please don't limit yourself to that.
No, great,
No,
great
get a
point.
diverse perspective.
Mhm.
One other thing, I know we're going to get to group questions here quickly, but if you're just relying on automated testing, you're lucky if you get half of the errors that are detected by the checkers. AI has not proved to be any better. So, just honestly being very transparent, you need humans to be involved in this process before it goes to production, or like Pina says, before you press the button and release it to the world.
For sure. And I'm going to use that as a segue to the last question we kind of have prepared before we shift to audience. Um, how can government teams prioritize accessibility services when budgets feel increasingly restrained and spread more thinly? I think we can all agree that there's a need for this and definitely a strong use case. How do we do it? Sheldon, start with you.
Think we joked earlier, like, what do you mean? Strapped but for money and budget and time? Never heard of it. The way I always talk about it, and I think accessibility is certainly the case, but I often talk about this in just user experience circles as well. How do we get more testing and more things in general? And I think you sort of need pressure at both ends. And what I mean by that is I think, as practitioners, and so, my circles, it's mostly designers, developers, I think there's got to be a lot of pressure built up with like advocacy work, but not just like saying it's a good idea, but also just like trying to sneak it into your project wherever you can, talking about it trying to integrate it into your work in any small way that you can, but also supporting others. So some practitioners are really skilled in accessibility, some are not. And so one of the things that we try to do as an organization is really try and like deliver practice guidance that helps meet any gaps that we might have, or to be able to share good stories when teams do research. We try to get that in front of as many people as we can and try to spread the success and knowledge and make sure that everybody that can use it gets access to it. And so I think as long as your talent pool and your practitioners are like trying to work this into their day-to-day work, and any successes are shared as broadly as possible, kind of helps mount that capability. But I also think that you can mount that as much as you can foster that community as much as you want. But I think at the end of the day, the organization needs to understand this space as well and understand its criticality. I think Pina has said before too, like there's a lot of people in the millions of persons with disability. Like, there's a lot of people at risk here not being served properly or adequately. And I think, speaking to the higher ups, getting them engaged in those conversations about, in usability work, we talk about like error rates, like can people even get through the experience? What kind of
Yeah.
problems do they do? And we've got other indicators too that you can point to, like customer service, call center support, email, like whatever it might be. But I think just understanding your product and how it performs and seeing where the failure rates are and where that failure demand kind of comes from are really good ways of building up that case of, we need a little bit of extra support here, here, and here. And sometimes it comes, sometimes it comes easy. People are bought into it and they understand. I think that was one of the, luxuries we had in this project, is that everyone really bought into the idea that this was important. But I think for stakeholders that are a little bit more difficult or a little bit more inexperienced or less savvy about the subject in general, being able to quantify some of these examples and where the problems are going to creep up, and really quantifying how big of an audience that might be and how severe of an impact that would be to the experience and the product and its adoption or usage. It's important to build those cases. So I think if you can get pressure on both sides, both from the practice and that leadership support, building those cases, I think you'll get there. And of course, this is all beside the fact that there's really no mandate or legislation to do it. You're largely relying on corporate policy to kind of wiggle your way in there and make the work a little bit more substantial, which, it's going to vary organization to organization. So I think pressure on both sides is a good place to start.
Let me just add on quickly, Sheldon, because I've had some good experience by having this tact. If you have employee resource groups, for example, or that people are passionate about accessibility and good digital design throughout the company, take the message to them and have them bring that forward through their, leadership groups. That can also really build some momentum as well. And then you're starting to drive that bus with a whole bunch of different people pulling the same way, as opposed to just trying to do it within, say, the design group per se. Often that tends to work well and start to get people really thinking and talking about it. And then ultimately, what is really a great driver, guys, is someone who is very visible, ideally comes on board and says, hey, yes, I have a family member or a great lifelong friend who has these particular challenges with certain types of disabilities, and they experience these things all the time. So I want to be the spokesperson for the company, and I want to drive this through and make some meaningful contributions and changes. So that's the best way to make it happen, but finding that person sometimes can be a challenge.
I do want to add a little bit of a caution to what you've just suggested, Scott, and only because I've seen it far, far too many times, where accessibility is, the thing on the side of your desk.
Always.
Right?
Yep.
It is never part of your job. It is not part of your accountability. And there's a lot of dependency on employees with disabilities or persons with disabilities to always do this work as a nice thing to do, right? Because I'm passionate about it. Because, I think that we need to get past that. I think we need to start really recognizing the value of that expertise that comes to the forefront, whether it is part of a job description, whether it's part of accountabilities, and people are recognized in the sense that if you're going to tap into your employee resource groups and you're going to make them part of your testing, groups, then recognize that and make sure that, you know, it is part of what their day is and not in addition to, right?
Yeah,
Because I think
absolutely.
it is
That's always
so,
the tact we've taken, but I
yeah,
think it's
yeah,
important to make sure that you recognize, just like to do sort of a tangential piece here, we want to make sure we pay people when we hire them to
yes,
test your website, right? We don't
exactly.
want them to do it out of the goodness of their heart either, Pina.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think that also speaks to your point, the point about, you know, when you have a slim budget, well, you know, you may not need to hire additional people. You can take the people, you know, or ask the people within your organization, but just make sure that that contribution is fair and it is recognized,
yeah, make
right?
sure it's recognized. Don't
Mhm,
just say,
mhm,
oh, you did it
mhm.
for me, and then don't ever
Yeah,
acknowledge it.
yeah,
That's important.
yeah.
Even
The
if
other,
it's not for that person's benefit, it's still
mm,
very important for the organization and the perception that the organization is actually
yeah.
taking action.
Yeah, and there are many tips where you can, you know, increase capacity without spending too much money. You know, another one
Yeah,
of those things is, especially if you're hiring within your digital groups, then look for that experience in your, you know, your recruitees, right? Your candidates. You know, do they know accessibility? Do they have a certification? Do they have some education in accessibility, digital accessibility, so that you're not having to train people from the start all the time, right? I think that's also another way of doing it, where again, you're not increasing, you're hiring anyway, but make sure that that's part of the requirements of your hiring, right?
yeah.
You
That's
know,
a great tip, Tina. Pina, I'm going to cut you off there just because I'm conscious of time. And I think it's a good segue into our first audience question.
Thanks.
And so that is uh, the government tends to want things built ASAP, as soon as possible. How do you advocate for accessible design even though leadership wants things built now? For example, no time to test code properly. And so, Pina, it came to mind as you were talking, as your point of, you know, can we look to people who are in-house? Can we look to folks who are in our pipeline for recruitment? And so, kind of looking to those skills that we already have in the organization. I'm sure that's not the only answer, but I'll just throw it back to you in case there's anything else you want to add kind of in that direction.
no, I really think that, you know, I think it's really important here to, like I said, to make sure that, you know, yes, everybody wants things yesterday. Everybody wants things fast, but sometimes you just have to bring them back to their values and kind of understand this is about customers. This is about employees, and you can have it out there today, but if it's not going to be good, you're going to have to pull it back and fix it anyhow, right? And I think
Yep.
to Scott's point, I think that one of the challenges we have here is that we don't hold people accountable and we don't have any teeth in our regulations. So, you know, even if something gets out there and it's not accessible, what's holding their feet to the fire? There isn't anything, right? And I
Yeah,
think
No.
it's upon us to take that responsibility seriously.
absolutely. Scott or Sheldon, anything you want to add?
I think there are lots of stories on the internet, but one I'm going to quickly share, which resonates with every time I tell it. Um, right at pandemic times, Beyonce did a website refresh and did not build a website to be inclusive for their visually impaired users. So they could not buy merchandise or book concert tickets. Where the process is very formalized down in the States, this was lodged as a complaint, and they ended up having to fix it and pay a rather large fine of about $5 million. So I always joke that, well, I guess she didn't get an engagement ring from Jay-Z after all. He had to take it back to pay that fine. But that just speaks to the fact that in Canada, we don't have any of those processes in place where people can go and put forth a complaint or what they call a violation if you read about it online. And then it goes through the process with, you know, WCAG violations, and lots of paperwork has to be done. And then of course it has to be remediated. So this kind of circles back to, hey, if you don't get it right the first time, there could be some real complications here, and there will be, you know, consequences in the future when Canada catches up, you know, and the different jurisdictions provincially catch up. There will be enforcement in these spaces, and it's sad we have to go to that point. Why can't people just do the thing right properly the first time for the right reasons. I mean, we can all hope and dream that we get there soon, but there probably will have to be lots of hand-wringing and difficult conversations to make that happen in this kind of space, and sharing those examples. I mean, people couldn't even get groceries delivered during the pandemic in the States because people didn't build their websites to be accessible. So how do you think that makes them feel that, you know, they're already marginalized? Now they don't belong at all. So yes, they were mad, and with every reason they should have been.
Yeah. And so with that, what might be a good way to recruit people across a broad range of abilities or disabilities to conduct usability testing and ensure their needs are met? So Scott, your example of grocery delivery, how can organizations engage with folks to get that feedback and a wide range of folks?
Well, Kim's setting me up for the easy softball question and answer
It
here,
was
but
just picking up on what you were
I know.
already saying.
Okay, so find organizations like Code for Canada is a perfect example for this, right? You find folks have worked in a number of different areas that I've been a privilege to kind of be a part on as a consultant and sort of subject matter expert, but not just, you know, public sector work. We've done all sorts of other projects. So, and you know, there are not just people who are screen reader humans, like myself, who are involved. They have all kinds of invisible and visible disabilities. In fact, the wonderful form that you folks have put together that is super accessible, by the way, it allows you to kind of categorize yourself as to what type of disability you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else want to jump in on that? Sheldon, I saw you unmute.
Yeah, I think this work is hard to do without a good partner for sure. And I don't say that just because of the nature of the webinar, but I truly mean that. I mean, we've, at the government of Alberta, we've tried to do many projects that sort of start, stop, because access to folks is very difficult. And I think even internally, we've tried some way of, we do a lot of usability testing in general. And so, our typical way of doing that, it's like an intercept on the website, and, we can target that to kind of whatever program area we want and that sort of thing. And we get a lot of people, but, we're always including in those sort of screening surveys, like, do you use an assistive technologies, English as second language, like all these other things that we would want to make sure that we're capturing people maybe more in the edges than the middle. And I think the fact is the uptake from those audiences, just the numbers just aren't there. And so I think without finding a good partner, with all research work, so much of it is having it at the ready. Like the first question is like, well, how do we do this? We want it yesterday. Well, you kind of need it pre-done, pre-packaged at the ready somehow, which is hard and challenging. And I think recruitment is one of those things, right? Unless you have access to a pool of candidates that you can screen based on, good broad demographic and experience of technology and all that sort of thing. Unless you can really get it pre-done, it's hard to sneak it into a production environment where sprints are 2 weeks long or releases are 30 days between, and that continuous improvement that Pina talked about earlier, right? Like, unless it's ready to go, it's really hard to squeeze it in. But I think our experience has been, they're kind of hard to find access to these folks just in general.
I
And so
don't
without a
know. I
good
don't,
partner,
yeah, I was going to say, Sheldon, I was going to say, I don't quite agree in the sense that they're not hard to find. It's really having and knowing where to go to find them. And there are a lot of disability agencies, there are a lot of organizations that actually do, bring those people with disabilities together. Many of them are trained and ready to work. We know that, people with disabilities are under hired, right? 54% unemployment for people with disabilities that are ready to work. These folks know what they're doing, right? So I think it's really a question of making sure that you know where to go. And my experience with public service in particular, they've already vetted a number of agencies they work with. And often what happens is just others don't know about them, right? So put it out there. Let people know you already have agreements with these agencies that they can reach out to, and that will help of course, having people with disabilities on your team, always the best way to do it, but you can't have representation of all disabilities on your team, especially if you're a small team, right? So how do you leverage what's out there so that, you know, you augment your capacity? And I think that's the one of the key things. And to your point about development of products and tools, most organization nowadays working in an agile environment, right? So they're sprints, they're little sprints, and so they release little functions at a time. It's so much easier and faster to test than trying to test an entire application at once. So get them involved in your sprints and get that feedback, you know, proactively so that you can try and fix as you go along rather than having to go back and fix later.
Yeah, so true. And I think Pina, you and Scott before had mentioned compensating folks adequately as well. And so just with that, in the recruitment process, just overtly stating, we're considering you subject matter experts. We'll compensate you as such as well. So I'd say it's another piece. I think we probably have time for well, we'll see how hot a topic this is. 1 to 2 more questions. So next audience question. How do we know if we're doing a good or bad job on the accessibility of our digital services? Is there any way we can measure them for continuous improvement? Great question. Anyone want to jump in?
I could start with that one.
Sure.
So I think there's a couple of ways to know if you're doing a good job. One would be making sure the mechanistic side is done, right? So we talked a little bit about compliance, and of course that's not enough, but I think knowing where your product stands on things like plain language, WCAG compliance scores, things like that, and making sure there's like tooling available to you to make those assessments. I think that will give you an indicator of like, okay, maybe some of the basics are covered off, that sort of thing. So that would be the best place to start. And I think where a lot of people probably get the most traction. It's easy to do. The other one though is, again, to Pina's point, it's like get people involved. So if you're usability testing, or if you don't even have a usability testing practice, you probably will never know if you're doing a very good job. I mean, you might have support requests, or hopefully, like Scott said with the Beyonce one, lawsuits will be a strong indicator. But I think, unless you're actually engaging with the population, you'll just never know. And so one of the easiest ways to approach the problem is to just go out and ask. Maybe a oversimplification, but I think if you're involving the people that you're trying to serve in the conversation of, whether it's development or validation, what's the experiences already there, unless you're getting in front of the people that you're trying to serve and hearing firsthand or observing successes and failures, you don't know. And so that's a key part. And I think something that not always easy to do, especially in their, sprints and release cycles and that sort of thing. But I think you have to get your product in the hands of its users, and no matter what shape or form they come in, and really just hear straight from them whether it works or not.
And then another piece to that, just quickly, Sheldon, is the sustainability, right? We've built something good, we've tested it, we know it works on the day of, but 3 months down the road, does it still work? Have we validated that? And then is there a feedback loop in place for someone to come to you and say, hey, the thing we built 3 months ago now doesn't work, here's why. And then how do we fix it without putting it at the bottom of the backlog?
You say feedback is powerful, good or bad.
Yep.
It's extremely powerful tool to know if you're doing well and where you're getting it right. And like you said earlier, when you're getting it right, when you're doing something, celebrate it, recognize it. I think that's the other thing that we just don't. We're so hard on ourselves when it comes to accessibility and trying to achieve that, quote unquote, and put this in little quotes here, that fully accessible solution, which is never going to happen, right? Something will never be fully accessible. But when you get it right, when you know that, it's made a difference, you've achieved it to the best of your capabilities, recognize it and celebrate it. And I think that goes a long way to your point about, you're doing it right, and people know you're doing it right.
Absolutely. Yeah, better to start somewhere than wait for that perfect solution, right? One other thing that comes to my mind just around that measurement piece is if you have, a way to submit tickets or for folks to, submit help questions or things like that, whether it's an email or phone number or, preferably both, then just kind of looking at, do we have fewer concerns about accessibility issues as well? So just probably the metrics
Absolutely.
that folks already have, they can look at. Sorry, I cut someone off there.
No, I was gonna absolutely, and not be defensive about it. It
Yeah,
is a person's experience, whether good or bad, it's their experience. And so, you take that and you kind of work through it, right?
absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to squeeze in one more question, folks. A bit more of a technical question here. To what extent should automated accessibility tools be used versus manual checking? Are there best practices on this? I know folks have
I
lots of ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I always say, if you're going to have a lot of stuff to test, starting with an automated testing tool is not a bad thing. It does give you a baseline. It gives you at least an idea of what issues are related to compliance, to coding, to using the right scripts and so on and so forth. And I think that's a really good way to get rid of some of the more common issues, right? But I would never do automated testing alone. It has to be done in conjunction.
Yeah, just to tag on to Pina's point, think of it as one of the tools in your toolbox, right? You work in Figma as a designer. You work on, your CSS and, any of the other code parameters that you write in if you're a developer. This is one of the things in your toolkit. It is a great first step, absolutely, because it can get some of the low-hanging fruit. But, humans will always need to be involved in testing and validating and talking through experiences when they don't make sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, double down on that for sure. It's got to be one of, right? It can't be the only. I think too, we're in a bit of an era where AI is getting better and better, stronger and stronger, and we're starting to see the emergence of like AI testing tools. And so, put your product in front of a persona that is like this
Mm.
kind of person. And I
Yeah.
think, interesting to try, but I think right now, and maybe this will not always be the case, but I think is certainly true today, is that there's just no proxy for a human being. There's no way to reflect in a tool the experience, the knowledge, like how people interact, their behaviors. There's just no substitute. And so I think a lot of the automated stuff, yeah, it's a good place to start and get your feet wet, but certainly can't be the only thing.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Sheldon, AI is a tool. It's not a replacement, right? We go back to those conversations. These are tools that can help situations, can help you get better at certain things, but they don't replace. And it's funny that this comes up because I was thinking this morning how, as humans, we only use like less than 10% of our brains, right? We've read that many, many times. And now with AI, I fear that we're going to use even less because people are so reliant on it, right? And if we look at the long-term effects of all of these things, how many people will lose the ability to write properly or speak properly, similarly to people not able to, have the dexterities because they've never learned cursive writing as an example, right? So all of these things, you got to think of both sides and what you're leaving behind when you're trying to replace whatever it is you're replacing with automation, right? So I think we really have to be aware of that and understanding the algorithms that are being used right today to build
Yeah,
AI, to inform AI, right?
And they're going to change,
They're going
right?
to change
They
based on
change right
data,
now.
but today they're based on the norm, right?
Yeah.
Today they're based on that quote unquote imperial 80-20 rule, and so those 20%, that 20% that is the marginalized, the more difficult, the ones that, don't follow a pattern will continuously be left out. And we can't risk that.
Well
absolutely.
said,
I
Pina.
feel like we could segue into a whole other hour conversation of AI and accessibility, and maybe we will at some point. But just conscious of time, and we're almost at the hour. I just want to thank you, Pina, Sheldon, Scott, for your time today, for your contributions. I learned a lot. I'm sure folks in the audience learned a lot as well. We're really grateful to have you share your insight today. Thanks to the audience for taking the time to learn today, for the questions that were posed. I know we didn't get to all of the questions, but hopefully there were some nice takeaways for you. Just a reminder, we will follow up tomorrow with a recording of today's session as well as a transcript, and so you'll receive that via email tomorrow. So thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.